Okay, so since we're going to be looking at additional ways to do our data, we want to get back to the original data. We're going to create another pivot table, but we're going to do it a little differently than we did last time. So guys, this is the same data set that we used before. We're using the beer sales data. Well, what we're going to do is go up to Insert. We're going to select everything, and we're going to say Pivot Table. Now, last time we said, hey, we'll just make sure we're selecting the range and make sure we're selecting New Sheet and hitting OK. But today, what we're going to do is something different. We're going to click the Add this data to the data model. Then we're just going to say OK. We're still going to create a new worksheet. Now, what's different about that? It's going to help us with something different. We're going to talk about the count function. In a later video, we're going to actually dive right into data model and understand, hey, what's the difference and what's the advantages of using that. But for now, we're just going to go through these measures. So you'll notice when you look over at the selection window is different. You have a range selected, but then you also have all the fields. So again, we're going to go through that with the data model. So the first thing we want to talk about that I want to go through is the count function. The count function is a very important feature. It's the benefit and the purpose of the count function is to measure dimensions and occurrence, and to understand where and who in relation to this dimension. Again, we had talked about dimensions as, hey, I'm a person. That's what it's being a dimension, like a customer name. That's a dimension. Whereas a measure is something that you're measuring, like sales or cost. Well, the thing about counts is you can actually turn a dimension itself into a measure. So let's look at that. So let's take all this out again. So here's a question. So again, our boss has given us this data and says, hey, I want you to tell me something about this data. So they say, well, okay, I want to know how my customers are spread out. So you're like, okay, well, what states are my customers in? So what you could say is, okay, give me the states. And these are all the states, right? And it's like, that's great, but like how many? So since it's the sales data, one thing you have to understand about data is this is repeating data. You have to understand what's a header data and what's line level data. Header data is like a description of the product. That's a header data. Customer is header data. These are things that are going to repeat in this, what we have right here, based on the fact of the lines. But the lines, the sales order line, this is unique in its sense where it has, okay, the cost and it has the quantities. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to say, all right, I want you to count customers. So we told it to count customers, but look, this looks like a large amount. We know we don't have this many customers. It's counting how many times the customer is in here, and that's not what we want. So how do we get a count of just that one customer? This is what's called a distinct count. It's going to say, okay, I'm only going to count that customer once, not every time that they occur. So what we want to do here is we want to go into our count function and go to the field value settings. So what we're going to do is we're not going to look at a normal count. We're going to look at what's called a distinct count. So we're going to go all the way to the bottom and you'll see distinct count. Guys, this is back to why we chose in the beginning to use a data model. A data model allows this function. So we're going to hit OK. So when we hit OK, we can see that it's changed. So it's no longer looking at the sales data and saying, okay, how many times is it repeating? But it's saying, okay, we're going to count it just once. So this is what's going to give us what our boss needs to say, okay, in these states, and then we can sort. I always have trouble finding it sometimes. There we go, largest. So we can see how many customers are in per state. And we can see, well, it's not very varied here. But as we can see in Georgia, if we pull on our customer name, we have 3 customers in Georgia. And then most of other states have just 1 customer each. And that's fine. So our boss might say, okay, well, tell me about the products in that sense. How many states have products? Or how many states are in each product? So let's look at that. And again, this is back to where we say we're pivoting. So to answer these questions, we don't have to change any of the data. Here, we just change our pivot. Okay, so we're just going to change our pivot. But hey guys, I just want to point out something to be very mindful of. Always be aware of which selections you have. Right here I have a distinct count on the customer name, but what we said we're going to do is we're going to look at the products. And so it's very easy to forget that I could say, hey, let's take customer name out and let's put product description here. This isn't what we want because it's still doing a distinct count of customer name. So what we have to do, since this is not a measure, we've made it a measure, but since it's not normally a measure, we have to take this out and we have to put description in. And then from there, we have to make sure that we go in and we're looking at a distinct count. Once again, it's gonna default to count, and then it's gonna go to distinct count. So guys, this is the most important lesson I can give. Slow down. Slow down and verify what you're doing. Verify what you're selecting. It's very, data can be very fun, but it can be very easy to get in and say, oh, I'm doing this, I'm flipping this here and I'm flipping this here. The wrong data is more harmful. You want the right data and the right information. This data is being turned into information. So that's just our data snack of this week is to slow down. And before you send anything out, make sure you go back and verify. So now that I have a distinct count of the description, we're going to take that out because it's just repeating data. So then here we go. We get to see, distinct count of every state. It's pretty even. We have some pretty even data. But this is, guys, how we would see a distinct count. We've talked about it multiple times, but we're going to go more into looking at some of the show values as. So this is the function where we're able to take a dimension, like say we were just looking at even our customer type, right? Where we have a grocery store and a liquor store, and then to say, okay, well, what are our product types under there? And let's go looking back at gross. So as we start going back looking at gross currency, we can say, well, what are our percentages? So before I was showing you to go through here, but you can also just right click into any of the value cells. And if you right click into the value cell, you can hit show value as. So we're going to go over a couple of these. A lot of these are there to just be there. They're not really as helpful or used. So we're going to try to focus on showing you the most useful ones. So the most commonly used is column total. So this is where we say, okay, the 100% of all sales through grocery store and type, and you can see that our ales are 10% within grocery and so forth. And we even should subtotal our customer type to say customer grocery stores are 70%, 70.52, and then you see the 29.48 for the liquor stores. So again, this being a pivot chart, it's doing of the column, and we can expand it out. So let's say we were even to look at our ship dates. Alright, so we're taking and looking at our ship dates, and we can even do from here to say, okay, again, looking at this percentage, this whole column of everything that shipped in January, for 8.8% is the ales, they are in a grocery store and so forth. We could even take out our customer types and go from here. So it's a nice way to kind of look from the top down to say, okay, what is the percentage? But it's not the only one. Another great one is, let's go back and making it complicated with we'll just pull in our customers, right? And then here you could look at it and say, okay, well, we have a lot of customers actually. Let's take the customers out and just go back to customer type. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, what about the grand total, the grand scheme of things? This is by just a month, but what if I say the grand total of the entire year? What were these percentages based on that? That we would have to do, you will right click and you show values as the grand total. Now you can see that the grand total is 100%, but you get to see, okay, January was 7.42% of the whole total. And then you get to see how our individual product types do within the liquor store per the grand total. So it's another way to just kind of take up the cube and pass it around and pivot and look and see how things look. And then there's another one that's very interesting. So we're gonna look at show percentage of. What you're gonna do with the percent of is you're gonna actually choose an actual dimension to compare all the other dimensions by. Let's take a look at that. So we're gonna take our description, which is our products, and then we have our the gross of our products. Now, when we do a quick sort from largest to smallest, we see Red Train is for over the year, is our greatest selling product. So if we want to say, okay, well, how are the others doing as it relates to Red Train? It's a very interesting way of looking at things. So we hit show values as, and then we hit this percent of. So what it's going to say is, okay, I'm looking at the fields, but what exact item do you want me to base everything else on? And we're going to say Red Train. It defaulted to blue because I clicked inside here. And if you say okay, then look at the percentages. So of course Red Train to Red Train is 100%, but it gives you a way of saying how are the others doing against your top performer. So you could say, okay, Blue Train is 93%. It's right behind there. It's got about 7% to catch up. And it becomes interesting when you extend this over, well, okay, what if I say states? How are how are states? This is interesting. So you get to see over states. Overall, Blue Train is the best, but Orange Citrus is actually doing really well in California, doing better than Blue Train. So you get to see how this looks as you put it over different ways of metrics and different ways of course, as you see Red Train performs, but Blue Train, actually, there's a couple of them that are doing better in certain states than the Blue Train. So it's just that the Blue Train is overall doing well. So it's, like I said, it's another way of being able to dive in and try to see things. Now we're going to look at percent of parent total. So we're going to take that out, and we're going to take this out, and we're going to look at percent total. I'm sorry, percent of parent total. So you got to think of parent is, it's going to be the farther left on the rows. So let's just get into this. Let's choose a customer type, and let's choose a product, right? So then we have our products and customers. Let's cool that a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull in our gross sales, and we're going to select show values as parent total. And we're going to base that off of, it says, okay, well, where's the parent? Because it sees two things. It sees the descriptions, and it sees it should always be the customer type, but it asks. So here you get to see, okay, these are percentages based off of its relation in this group. And you're saying, well, you know, that's not too difficult. It's not too much, but what if we look at it over time? And this is not showing me any totals. So you get to see here that, of course, the customer types are 100% across the board. So you get to see, okay, for this group, this is how I'm performing. You can see that we get 100%. So you can see these percentages. And the good thing about it is, by choosing that parent, you can still introduce, let's say you introduce states. It's still looking at its performance based within where it is, based on the total of the grocery. So it's a way of kind of diving in and seeing, I mean, here you're seeing a lot of those percentages, but it's a way of diving in and seeing different information and seeing how things relate to each other. That's the great thing about a pivot chart. So we want to end with looking at some of the formatting. So now that we kind of looked at the show values as, there's a lot of times when you're making pivot charts and you're creating formats, and let's, for instance, say we do a customer type, we do a gross sales, and let's say that's a sum, and let's say this is an average. And this doesn't look very pretty. So a good way you can format some of the titles is if you right click into them, click on the values, and you can go to, it has a custom name up here. So instead of saying average of gross 2, we can just say average sales. You can see that the column title changes here, and you can do the same for the others. So it's a quick way that you can format the headers of your pivot chart so you don't have all this craziness. Another one you see me doing a lot of is right clicking into the values and going to number format. So you can do it a couple ways. You can click right in here and go to values and hit number format, or you can right click there. You'll go straight into number format, and as you're looking through, you can see the different ways. You can go into number, it just shows it as a number, and then you can go into currency, accounting formats. There's a lot of different formats. One I commonly use a lot is currency, and it likes to default to 2. I usually don't like looking at 2 decimal places if I'm looking at big numbers. You can also format it to say, hey, negative numbers are going to look, a negative, or it could be a red. You can make them red. We don't have any negative numbers here, but you can do that. You can go down to the accounting, which of course takes the accounting formats. You can even put them in different formats. So I just encourage you to kind of go in here and look at things and say, hey, how do you want to look at them? Where you say percentage, you can increase decimals. So whereas we click here, right, and we had average, what if we change that to show value as column total, right? And you can see how it's percenting it. So, and putting 2 different decimal places instead of 100%, 98%. Or you could choose to take it away. You can choose, again, I don't want, what did that say? Oh, we have this on a, so it's still showing an average. There we go. So, like I said, guys, always be look at your data and make sure you know what you're doing. So it's just different ways to format those. And last, I want to talk about. Let's just throw in a chart with a bunch of numbers, and a bunch of stuff. So let's just throw in customer names. That's enough. Total sales. It's as a percentage. We want to take that off. Actually, put that back to just a number. Currency. So what we're going to look at is, if you go to the design tab, there's a couple of options you have. I'm always a big proponent of, you don't necessarily need to make a pivot table look pretty. It's more about what your information is and what the message you're bringing across. I've seen lots of charts and graphs that are, oh, this looks awesome, but it's wrong. So at the end of the day, it hasn't done its job. So, but if you go to the design tab, there's a couple things you can do. They have some pivot table styles you can automatically select. So you can go through and just click some template styles. You can go over to take out subtotals or put in subtotals. So it's just quick ways to format it here. Grand totals you can take off for rows. You can take it off rows and columns. You can put it for only columns. You can do all sorts of things. One thing I do think is kind of interesting is the banded rows. So this is a way to, if you have a lot of data, you can make it easier to read. So it does that, white, gray, white, gray. And you can do the same for columns. If you have multiple columns. So it's a nice way to kind of, help separate it, make it look a little, and then these pivot table styles will follow and suit to that, or you can take it off. It's however you want to do it. So, there's a couple ways, guys, that you can change things up. But, so I just want to give you guys a little heads up on, some of the formatting.